There's a kind of coherence that kills. Not the coherence of madness, but of logic, followed to its end, past the point where most philosophers quietly set down the pen and return to ordinary life. In October 1910, a 23-year-old student in Gorizia completed his doctoral dissertation. The next morning he shot himself. His name was Carlo Michelstaedter. His thesis was called Persuasion and Rhetoric. No committee ever graded it. This video traces the argument he made and the life that argument consumed. 2 questions will follow us through what comes next. First, can a philosophy be so honest that it demands its own author's death? And second, what separates the man who sees the truth from the man destroyed by it? Gorizia in the early 20th century was a peculiar place. A border town in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Italian-speaking but Habsburg-ruled, caught between cultures the way border towns always are. Carlo was born there in 1887 into a Jewish family of some means. His father, Alberto, managed an insurance company. His mother, Emma, came from the Luzzatto line, old Triestin intellectuals. He was the youngest of 4, bright, restless, drawn to painting before philosophy. His early letters show someone already uncomfortable with surfaces, already suspicious of any language that smoothed things over. In 1905, he enrolled at the University of Florence to study literature. Florence should have softened him. It did the opposite. He read the Greeks, Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Empedocles, not as historical curiosities, but as men who had stared at something real. He read Schopenhauer and felt the floor shift beneath him. Schopenhauer gave him the architecture, the world as representation, the will as blind striving, the insight that desire is a wheel that never stops turning. But Michelstaedter wanted something Schopenhauer would not give him. Schopenhauer offered resignation, aesthetic contemplation, ascetic withdrawal, the quiet dissolution of will. Michelstaedter found this cowardly. He wanted not escape from the will, but mastery over it, possession of oneself in the present tense. This distinction is everything. Remember it. It is the hinge on which his entire philosophy turns, and eventually the hinge on which his life breaks. Between 1905 and 1910, his life compressed. His brother Rico died of tuberculosis. His close friend Nadia Baradin, to whom he wrote obsessive letters, killed herself in 1907. Death was not abstract for Michelstaedter. It sat in the room with him while he wrote. It had a face. Several failure. Nobody. And yet the dissertation he began writing in 1909 is not a document of grief. It is frighteningly calm. It reads like a man who has thought past sorrow into something harder. So, what did he actually argue? The dissertation splits human existence into 2 modes. He calls them persuasion and rhetoric. These are not rhetorical categories. They are ontological ones, ways of being. Persuasion, persuasione, is the condition of possessing oneself completely in the present moment. Not hoping, not deferring, not reaching toward a future satisfaction. Being here now, with the full weight of existence resting on this instant. He writes, "He who possesses himself in himself has no need of anything further. He does not wait, does not expect, does not hope, does not fear, for he already has everything in himself." This is not mysticism. Michelstaedter is precise. Persuasion is not a feeling. It is a structural relationship to time. The persuaded man does not live in anticipation. He does not say, "When I finish this, then I will be satisfied." Think about how radical this is. Every institution, school, career, marriage, retirement, is built on deferral. You suffer now so that later you may rest. You work now so that eventually you may live. Michelstaedter saw this and named it for what it is, a confidence trick. The future never arrives. When it does, it has already become another present. And by then you are deferring again, eyes fixed on the next horizon. He finds this insight already in Parmenides. Being is. Non-being is not. What exists now, not in some future that will redeem the deficiency of the present. The present is either sufficient or it is nothing. And in Heraclitus he finds the complement. Everything flows, yes, but the fire that burns is fully itself in each instant of birth. The flame does not defer its heat to tomorrow. Can you live like that? Can you burn without saving fuel for later? This is not a rhetorical question for Michelstaedter. He means it literally, and his own answer will be literal too. He uses a metaphor that has haunted readers for a century. Imagine, he says, a weight hanging from a hook. The weight wants to fall. That is its nature. But the hook holds it. The weight can never be satisfied while hanging. It reaches downward with all its being but never arrives. If it could speak, it would say, I will be content when I reach the ground. No. But the hook is its entire existence. Without it, the weight would simply fall, and falling, it would cease to be a weight at all. This is the human condition as Michelstaedter sees it. We are weights that want to fall. Our desires pull us downward. But satisfaction, true arrival, would mean the end of desire, and thus the end of us as desiring being. You can hear Schopenhauer here, but listen to what Michelstaedter does with it. Schopenhauer concluded that therefore renounce. Michelstaedter concludes, therefore possess yourself now in the act of wanting, without waiting for the wanting to end. Persuasion is not the absence of desire. It is desire that has stopped lying to itself about the future. It is hunger that does not pretend a meal is coming. And then there is rhetoric. If persuasion is the truth of human existence, rhetoric is the lie, but a lie so vast, so total, so intricately constructed that almost no one ever sees through it. Rhetoric, for Michelstaedter, is not just persuasive speech. It is the entire social apparatus, language, law, custom, education, science, that keeps human beings from confronting the insufficiency of their existence. He writes, society is the organization of mutual insufficiency. Each person leans on the next, and the structure holds, but only because no one dares stand alone. Consider how precisely he anatomizes this. The child is taught that learning has a purpose, a grade, a career, a reward. The purpose is always elsewhere. The present moment of learning is never enough in itself. The worker endures Monday for the sake of Friday. Friday arrives and he defers again, to vacation, to retirement, to the afterlife if necessary. The chain of deferral has no final link. Language itself is rhetoric. When you say, I will be happy when you have already surrendered the present. The grammar of hope is the grammar of evasion. Even philosophy, Michelstaedter argues, has become rhetorical. Aristotle, whom he treats with open hostility, turned philosophy into a system, and a system is rhetoric's masterpiece. The illusion that knowing the name of a thing is the same as possessing. He calls Aristotle the great rhetor, not because Aristotle was dishonest, but because he built a framework in which truth could be catalogued, archived, and thus safely ignored. Ask yourself how much of your own thinking operates this way. You read a difficult book, extract its thesis, file it alongside other theses, and feel you have understood. But have you been changed? Or have you only organized your ignorance more neatly? Michelstaedter pushes further. Rhetoric is not only external, it colonizes the interior life. We rhetorize ourselves. We tell ourselves stories about who we are, what we want, what we are working toward. These stories are not innocent. They are mechanisms of survival. Without them, you would have to face the present as it is. Insufficient, raw, devoid of guarantees. And that, Michelstaedter says, is exactly what you must do. But who can? Who actually lives without the scaffolding? He names a few. Christ, in certain moments. Socrates at the trial refusing to beg. Ibsen's characters. Brand who demands all or nothing. And pays the price. Notice the pattern. The persuaded are almost always destroyed. Socrates drinks the hemlock. Christ is crucified. Brand is buried by an avalanche. Persuasion does not promise survival. It promises only honesty. And here is where the reader begins to feel uneasy, because the logic is starting to tighten around a conclusion that no one wants to draw. Let us state it plainly. If rhetoric is deferral, and deferral is the essence of ordinary life, and persuasion is the refusal to defer, then persuasion and continued living exist in permanent tension. To live is to project yourself into a future. To eat breakfast is to defer death by a few hours. To breathe is an act of biological hope. The body itself is rhetorical. It promises itself a tomorrow. Michelstaedter knew this. He was not naive. His dissertation does not conclude, therefore die. It is more honest than that, and more terrifying. It concludes, there is no solution. Persuasion cannot be sustained. The moment you try to build a life around it, a practice, a discipline, a routine, you have rhetorized. You have turned authenticity into a project, and a project is deferral by definition. This is the cruelest insight in the entire dissertation. You cannot practice persuasion. You cannot train for it. The moment it becomes a goal, it has already become rhetoric. What does it mean to read this and feel, against your better judgment, that he is right? That the trap he describes is real, that you are inside it? And that there is no door marked exit? The dissertation was completed on October 16, 1910. It runs to about 200 pages. It is written in Italian prose of extraordinary clarity, dense but never obscure, angry but never shrill. The appendices are strange. They contain analyses of Plato's dialogues, readings of Parmenides, meditations on the nature of language. They feel like a man putting his intellectual house in order. On October 17th, the day after finishing, Michelstaedter shot himself with a revolver in his family home in Gorizia. He was 23 years old. The immediate cause, if there must be one, may have been a quarrel with his mother that morning. But to call a quarrel the cause of this death is like calling the match the cause of the fire when the house was soaked in kerosene. The dissertation was the kerosene. 5 years of sustained, unblinking attention to the impossibility of authentic existence within the structures of human life. 5 years of seeing through every consolation. And yet, this must be said, the dissertation itself never argues for suicide. Nowhere in its pages does Michelstaedter write, therefore, one must die. The argument is subtler and worse. It argues that life as we live it is already a kind of death. The slow death of deferral. The quiet suffocation of rhetoric. And that the alternative, persuasion, cannot be maintained. Between these two impossibilities, the text simply stops. The silence after the final sentence is the loudest part of the dissertation. Michelstaedter did not need to write his conclusion. He lived it. But was it philosophy? Or was it pathology? This is the question that has divided readers for over a century. And it is a question that reveals more about the reader than about Michelstaedter. Those who call it pathology have a case. Michelstaedter lost his brother, his closest friend, and was by all accounts prone to intense emotional states. Depression, grief, isolation. These are clinical categories, not philosophical ones. But those who call it philosophy also have a case, and a stronger one, because the argument in the dissertation is rigorous. It does not depend on Michelstaedter's mood. You can reconstruct it without knowing anything about his life, and it still holds. Lepardi wrote that the truth is ugly. Michelstaedter went further. He suggested that the truth is structurally incompatible with the act of living, not because life is suffering, but because living requires the very deferral that truth exposes as illusion. This puts him in a lineage that includes Kierkegaard, who leapt into faith to escape the same trap, and Camus, who decades later would declare the absurd and insist on living anyway, a position Michelstaedter would have called rhetorical. Camus famously wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Michelstaedter would have asked, for whose benefit? If Sisyphus is happy, he has stopped seeing the stone. And if he sees the stone clearly, happiness is a word that no longer applies. The dissertation was published posthumously in 1913 by his cousin Emilio Dotta. It attracted some attention in Italian philosophical circles, then faded. For decades, Michelstaedter was a footnote, a curiosity, a suicide with a thesis. It was not until the 1970s and 1980s that Italian scholars, Sergio Campea chief among them, began the serious work of recovering his thought. What they found surprised them. Michelstaedter had anticipated, by decades, arguments that would later be attributed to Heidegger, to the existentialists, to the deconstructionists. His critique of institutional knowledge prefigures Illich taught. His analysis of language foreshadows Derrida. But there is a difference. Heidegger wrote Being and Time and then joined the Nazi Party. Derrida deconstructed presence and then built a career. The institutional philosophers survived their own insights. Michelstaedter did not. Is survival a refutation? If you argue that authentic existence is incompatible with the structures of daily life, and then you go on living, teaching, publishing, collecting a salary, have you disproved your own thesis, or merely failed to honor it? Michelstaedter's death is either the strongest argument for his philosophy, or its ultimate irrelevance. There is no middle reading. You must decide, and the decision says something about you. His paintings survive. They are good, not great, but good. Portraits of friends. Self-portraits with searching eyes. Landscapes of the karst plateau around Gorizia. They show a man who looked hard at things. His letters survive too. They are more human than the dissertation. Warmer, funnier, occasionally petty. He complains about professors. He misses home. He worries about money. He sounds, in other words, like a 23-year-old. And this is perhaps the hardest thing about Michelstaedter. He was not a monster of pure intellect. He was a young man who liked to paint, who loved his mother despite quarreling with her, who wanted to be understood, and who saw something he could not unsee. The objection writes itself. He was depressed. He was grieving. His philosophy was a rationalization of despair, dressed in the language of Parmenides. Reduce the philosophy to the biography, and the problem dissolves. But it does not dissolve, because the argument stands independent of the arguer. You can strip away the biography entirely. No dead brother, no suicidal friend, no quarrel with his mother, and the logic of persuasion and rhetoric remains intact. The present moment is insufficient, but irreplaceable. Deferral is a lie that makes survival possible. Authenticity, fully achieved, is structurally unsustainable. These are propositions. You can argue with them. What you cannot do is dismiss them by pointing at the man who wrote them and saying he was sad. So we return to the two questions we began with. Can a philosophy be so honest that it demands its own author's death? Michelstaedter's work suggests not a demand, but something quieter, a permission. The philosophy did not command him to die. It removed every reason he had to live dishonestly. And what separates the man who sees the truth from the man destroyed by it? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps seeing clearly and being destroyed are the same act, performed at different speeds. The philosopher over a lifetime. Michelstaedter in a single morning. He left behind 200 pages, a handful of paintings, a stack of letters, and a silence that has outlasted every attempt to explain it. Philosophers after him learned to hedge. They learned to write, perhaps, and in a certain sense, and it remains an open question. They learned to survive their own conclusions.